everybody, and thank you for coming tonight. So, my name is Dr. Martin Paulus. I'm the Scientific Director of the Lloyd Institute for Brain Research. And as we've indicated, today we're going to talk a little bit about our ABCD study and give you some updates about the ABCD study. Before I start, I wanted to say that all of what we're doing here is really a team effort. And here's a nice picture of the team. Want to just introduce a couple of the folks, and you may have seen some of them outside. There's Colin, one of our research assistants, who's really critical for conducting the studies. There's Kyle Simmons, who's one of the co-investigators on the study. Teresa Victor, who's helping with all the media and has helped us actually with setting up our websites for ABCD and our outreach. There's Jiří Budurka. He's our Chief Technology Officer and physicist. He makes sure that the MRI machine is running and is running just perfectly. Then we have our fearless leader, Florence, who's basically made the study really the success that it is so far. We have Cindy, Dehana, and Alicia, who's also helping Florence to really run these experiments. I know that some of the parents that have participated in know how complex the scheduling can get, how much time is involved. Then we have Amanda Morris, who's also a co-investigator, and we have so it's really, I want to say it's a whole team that makes this happen. So let me give you an outline of what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll tell you a little bit about the ABCD study, just to remind you what are we trying to do with this study. And then I will focus in on internet use, TV watching and video gaming in adolescents. I'll tell you a little bit about what the data so far say and what we found so far. Basically, we'll give you data that is really very, until very recent. So many of you may not know this. The study started officially in September of last year. And so we've been recruiting participants into the study since that time. And we then just recently received data from the coordinating site that was as recent as March 1st. So we have basically now data from all of the sites that we can then analyze and do some preliminary analysis with. So basically talking about TV, video, and internet use. I'll introduce you to what's called the Child Behavior Checklist. All the parents that have participated in it know what it is because they filled it out, but I'll tell you what we're measuring with this. And then I will basically be linking how is internet use and TV and video watching related to problem behaviors. And then also, how is internet use related to physical activity? Two questions that maybe many of the parents may want to know at this time. And then I will talk just a little bit about future direction, but I really want to take some time to also field some questions, things that you may want to know about the study or about really anything related to what we're doing here at LIBR. So just to remind everybody, what is the ABCD study? So the ABCD study will be the largest study of its kind, enrolling about, the goal now is around 11,000 kids, healthy children, and from ages 9 to 10, and then follow them into early adulthood. And these are the sites where all the data are being collected. In fact, there are now a few more sites that are not yet on this picture, but you can actually follow the sponsors of the study have created a website. Here's an example of what it looks like as of today. And they're really trying to reach out and provide you with the latest updates on the study. So we're this site here, as you know, and we're one of the recruiting sites for this study. So what ABCD is trying to do is really chart out and develop national standards of normal brain development in youth. How does the brain of a child, of a young person, develop during the second decade of his or her life. And what's really important here, and I want to emphasize that, we want to be extremely diverse, and we want to have a good representation of all aspects of the population in the different, at the different sites, but also in Tulsa. And so we've made a very, very intense effort to reach out to various schools, because obviously our primary recruitment mode is through the schools. Now recently that has changed. It is now actually permissible that we can have referrals directly from other participants. So if you have somebody that you know that would be interested in participating, we'd be happy to take the person. Really, what we're doing is we're comparing our recruitment, the characteristics of our recruitment participants very closely to the census, so that we have a good representation of the different aspects of the population here in Tulsa. And we've been doing actually quite well so far. This is the latest recruitment chart. I know it looks like spaghetti, but basically what it shows is the study started recruiting subjects in September. We're now getting close to May. And this line is when you reach the 100% recruitment rate. That is, at what time do you start recruiting at the rate you should be recruiting? And as you can see, a lot of sites have been ramping up slowly. But what's really exciting for us, we actually are the #1 recruiting site of all the different sites in the country. So we beat out University of California, San Diego, University of Michigan, Yale, WashU, St. Louis, Florida International. So there's a whole bunch of other sites, and it's really, I have to say, it's because you have participated, right? I mean, we can, these numbers here is you, is basically the parents and the kids that have been part of this. So we're very excited about this, and we've been recognized by the National Institute for being really sort of an outstanding, almost like a poster child of recruitment. So I'm very quite excited. So let me talk a little bit about TV, video, and internet activity. Now, I just had this conversation just off to the side. You know, internet has changed our lives so dramatically, right? I mean, if you think about it, if you step back 2 decades, well, I can step back 2 decades, and there was no Google Maps, there was no Uber, there was no whatever not. We basically didn't, we worked with paper maps, and we kind of ordered cabs or tried to get a ride with a friend. Now all of this has changed, right? And all of that is, of course, affecting the way we are processing information, the way we are processing how we interact with friends. There was no Facebook, there was no whatever the latest is, no Twitter, whatever. So these tools obviously fundamentally affect the way we are interacting with peers. And so I thought it would be very interesting to just see, at least at the beginning, where are we with our kids at this point in time. So to set this up a little bit, this was a recent study of 11 to 17-year-olds that was published in 2016. And it's actually one of the largest studies that has been done. But already the numbers that we have with ABCD is already by a factor of 5 to 6 times larger than this study. So we already have a much larger sample. But what they reported is that basically 98%, basically everybody, of young people aged 11 to 17 reported current internet use. And there's no significant difference whether you're a girl or a boy. And then 85%, so basically almost everybody, played electronic games. And it is in general, this is replicated in other studies, that it's usually more the boys that play the video games than the girls. But it's not by much. So you can't see all these numbers, but I just want to highlight sort of the amount of time that we're consuming, internet access. See, this is what happens. Jinx High School is calling me now, but I will not. See, this is what I'm talking about. This constant connectivity. So basically, what they found is that about 1% of 11 to 17-year-olds on an average daily, on an average weekday, don't use the internet. About 46% use it 1 to 2 hours. About 25% using it 3 to 4 hours. 17% use it 5 to 8 hours. And 10% use it 9 or more hours. I mean, that's on a daily basis. That means that somebody is is basically hooked up almost every waking minute. So it shows you how this has penetrated our lives. So what we're going to show you now is real data from our ABCD cohort. So I'm going to walk you through this a little bit because the graphs will look very similar for the different reports that we have generated so far. So basically, what you're going to see is, so in this particular case, we're looking at watching TV. And then we have different categories. And these different categories are indicated by different colors. And the categories are shown here. So you see, basically, you have to read this from the right to the left side. So basically, this is none. This is less than 30 minutes. This is 30 to 60 minutes, 60 minutes to an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and 4 more hours. So actually, our categories are a little less intense than what the other study showed. But basically, what you see, there are 2 bars. Down here is our side, so that's Tulsa, and up here is the rest. So this is just to give you an idea of how do we stack up to all the other sides. And so what you can see is that the bars are almost completely lined up. What that means is basically we're not in any way different watching TV here in Tulsa than all the other sides across the country. So if you look at the different distribution. And you can see about 5% here are watching 4 more hours of TV on an average weekday. So that's sort of the extreme group, but they're pretty comparable here. Now here is watching videos. Of course, again, we're changing the way we're consuming entertainment, right? I mean, less and less do kids watch TV. They're basically watching YouTube or they're watching some other thing on the internet. So again, what we're seeing here, we're seeing actually more of the kids at the age, as you know, these are 9 to 10-year-olds. Most of the kids at this age are not quite yet watching as much as the 11 to 17 that you saw on the other slide. But here we have a substantial portion, I would say 25% of the kids that don't yet watch videos. And then you have, again, about a little more than 5% that really watch more than 4 hours. And I'm pointing this out because I'm going to make a point later on. But again, if you compare it to the rest of the country, we're looking just about the same. So there really are no significant difference between LIBR or Tulsa and the rest of the sites. And then the same thing, again, with now playing video games. This is, and it's the same category. So from none to 4 more hours. We're actually seeing a little bit a fewer percentage. So in our case, it's a little, I would say it's slightly more than about 10% of kids that don't play video games. It's a little more on the other sides, but really not by much. But if you again look at the other categories, they line up. Overall, you can see that the way that our kids here play video games is pretty much the same as in the other sites. So there aren't a lot of differences. And then here is social network sites. Now here it's important to remember the kids are still very young, 9 to 10 years old. So we don't see a lot of social network sites. Now so one of the things actually I want to go back. All of these reports are reports by the kids, right? So this is what the kids are telling us. And you can see in whether it's the other sides or whether it's our side in Tulsa, most of the kids really are not yet using extensive internet. And that actually is really helpful to us because here's the thing. One of the fundamental problems that we're having with the studies that have been conducted up to now is that it's incredibly difficult to talk about cause and effect. right? Even what I'm going to show you today really doesn't speak to cause and effect. And the reason is because it simply says, okay, the kids that do this also do that. But they could do that for a number of different reasons. It doesn't mean that this causes that. The only way that you can really only determine this is you follow the kids over time. And you then see what happens as the kids engage in more different types of activity. How does that affect their behavior? How does that change what they're doing, how they're feeling, how they're reporting? And that's why we need these longitudinal, these follow-up studies. So in a sense, having not a lot of social network activity in this way is a good thing, because then we can study what happens when that does happen, which obviously it will. Now here's an interesting piece. So we also asked the kids whether they play mature video games. Now it's actually interesting. I talked to Florence earlier. Of course, mature is the way we define it, right? The kids don't know what mature is, so we actually have to give them examples of. And so here are the 4 common examples of what we talk about, and they usually know once we mention a couple of them. Okay, these are the mature video games. So it turns out that, again, a majority, which is what we would expect, have never played any mature video games. But not an insignificant amount of the kids, like I would say maybe 20% played once in a while, and maybe 10% and then a little less than that played regularly or all the time. So already you're seeing sort of mature video gaming going on at a fairly young age. And again, what we're trying to understand now, what is the impact of that in the child's development? So we have a lot of kids who have not yet played, but then of course we want to see how does it affect the development of the brain. Now, so what I'm going to show you next is how are these behaviors that we're gotten from the kids, how are they associated with problem behaviors? And by problem behaviors, I mean behaviors that we normally would seek help for. So what we did, and part of the study is to get what's called the Child Behavioral Checklist. It's a rating scale that's completed by the parents, and it's a highly standardized assessment. It's been given hundreds of thousands of times in all over the world. There are many different languages. And it's usually completed by parents or by parent surrogates, that is, adults who take care of the kids, and basically in a family-like context. And the rating goes, basically, you rate 0 for not true, these are individual statements, 1 for somewhat true, and 2 for very true. And then based on these ratings, there are different categories that are put together. So let me walk you through this slide because it's a little complicated. So these are the different categories of the child behavior checklist. So there's anxious, depressed, there's withdrawn, there's somatic complaints, social problems, thought problems, attentional problems, rule-breaking, and aggressive behavior. These are just basically categories. And what is being done with the child behavioral checklist, the ratings that the parents give are normed. And what that means is that they're compared to a large group of kids of the same age, of the same gender, and then a score is computed. Now the mean score is 50. So 50 is what basically an average kid would look like. And then it's scaled by the variability that you normally see in a group of normal kids. Now, what we've shown, basically what we show here is we show the scores for all of the sites, for our sites, and for what is not our sites. And really, all this really says is that on average, our site has about exactly the same report of problems that any other site has. So we're not different than all the other sites. Most of the kids are within a completely normal range. There's no problem whatsoever. There are a few kids, and these are the dots that you see here, for which we have higher ratings. And those would be the kids that would have that could potentially have real problems in some of these areas. And each dot represents one kid, and the top dots here, that represents the other sides, and the bottom dots, that's our side. And so you can see basically the take-home point here is we're looking just like the other sides. And for the most part, the average is completely normal. But now, how do we relate this to the different behaviors that I showed you before? So what I'm going to show you now is a number of different kinds of relationships between TV, video, and internet activity and the child behavior checklist. So the first thing I want to show you is a relationship with the subscale, which is called withdrawn or depressed on the child behavior checklist, and TV watching. And what you see, first of all, what should be most evident is that really there isn't really that much happening here. For the most part, you actually see that they're very similar. The means, which is the red dots, and kind of the variation, which is the boxes, is very similar. And what you see, the different categories here: no TV watching, basically less than 30 minutes, and 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and more than 4 hours. So all of those categories really don't vary. The problem behavior, withdrawal, depressed, don't vary much. The only difference where you see a little bit of an increase is the kids that watch 4 more hours of TV. And that'll be a theme that I'll want to kind of show you in some of the next few slides. So here is social problems. So this is a scale where basically we look at to what extent do the kids report social problems as rated by the parents. And again, what you see, for the most part, there's no effect. In other words, really, watching TV has no effect on the amount of social problems, except, again, for the largest group, for the group that has the most TV watching, where we have the slightly higher rate of social problems. The same is true for attentional problems. If you look at TV watching and now look at the attentional problem subscale of the child behavior checklist, and again, what you see, for the most part, there really is no difference, except, again, for the highest group, which is the kids that watch 4 more hours. So what should be clear by now is that moderate consumption of TV in the 9 to 10-year-olds really is not associated with increased problem behaviors. And again, what we have to be careful here, that doesn't mean necessarily a causal relationship. It just means we can't really make a strong association. We can say that if there is no relationship, there probably is no causal relationship. Now, with these kids, we're now obviously looking at this in more detail to see whether there are some, over time, whether there are some causal relationships. Now, aggressive behavior, that's an interesting one because, of course, there's always been the issue of, do kids that watch a lot of TV, do they show more aggressive behavior? Now, with the exception of the kids that are in the high group, 4 more hours, really that's not the case at all. Now, interestingly, when we look at videos, we actually don't see that. So if I go back one, here we saw that the highest group really show, it's actually statistically significant, more aggressive behavior. But if you actually look at the highest group that watch videos, you don't see that at all. There's no relationship between aggressive behavior and watching videos. Again, it is similar to that we have the highest group has a little bit more attention problems. Now, as we turn our attention to video games, we see that, again, for the most part, if you look at social problems, there's no relationship between the amount of video gaming and social problems, except now, in this case, it's the 2 highest groups where we see a little bit more problem behavior. It's the kids that play 3 or more hours or 4 more hours of video games a day, on an average day. We also see that the kids that play 4 or more hours of video games have a little bit more attention problems, but for the rest of the groups, there really isn't any difference. And finally, for aggressive behavior, we see for those kids who play 4 more hours, we see a little higher, and that is, again, statistically significant, aggressive behavior. But again, for the other groups, we don't see any relationship at all. So we can really conclude that playing video games, at least at this age, and again, as you saw before, most of these games are not mature games, so they're not necessarily aggressive games. But for the most part, the kids really don't show more aggressive behavior. And by the way, all of these graphs that I just showed you are the aggregate information from all of the sites. So this is about 1,400 kids from all of the sites that have so far been enrolled in the ABCD study. So this is not just our site, this is all the sites. So in terms of the summary here, what we can say is if you look at actually depressed, and I didn't actually even show you most of these data, that we didn't find any association between higher levels of depression and watching TV, watching videos, or playing video games. There was no association. Now, we did see an association with having more social problems, but I have to be clear, only with the group that had really excessive video watching or excessive TV watching or excessive playing of video games, so 4 more hours on an average day. We saw some attentional problems with watching TV and playing video games, and some aggressive behavior increases with playing video games and watching TV. But again, for those groups, only for the extreme group, only for the kids that spend 4 more hours doing these activities. And so this is now sort of how do we stack up to what we already know from the literature. This is a study that was recently published. It's a kind of busy slide, but basically what they did, they looked at also problem behaviors, and they looked at basically engaging in internet use and the amount of problem behaviors. And what you can see, these lighter bars here, is really what the emergence of problem behavior is. And what you can see, not unlike what we found, is it's only really in the higher groups, in those who have excessive internet use in this particular case, where you see problem behaviors. Anything less, in their case, actually anything less than 4 hours wasn't really associated with significant problem behaviors. So it's not unlike the finding that we have. And the same is true again here, where they looked at on the weekend daily internet use, and they looked at low, moderate, high, and very high problem behaviors. And what they found, it's really only in the extreme groups where you see a significant increase in the high and very high problem behaviors. So again, not unlike what we found with our preliminary data. So the take-home point here from these data is you really don't have to be worried too much, at least at this stage, because the kids are 9 to 10. If the kids engage in moderate TV watching, video watching, or internet behavior, as long as it isn't extreme, in our case it was the 4 more hours, we did not see any increase in problem behaviors. And that's consistent with what the literature shows. So now let's take a look at physical activity, because of course physical activity is also important. It drives brain development, and it helps to build resiliency. So there are lots of positive things that are associated with physical activity. Well, first of all, again, let's take a look, how does Tulsa stack up to the rest of the country? So this is actually basically the amount of days physically active. And again, it's the same kind of graph that I showed you before. Down here is Tulsa, and up here is the rest of the country. And what should be really very clear is that we're absolutely the same as the country is. So basically, very few kids have no days physically active. We have about 5 to 10% that is only active 1 day, maybe 5 to 10% only active 2 days. And then we have a good amount of kids that is active every day. In fact, it looks that here in Tulsa, we have more kids that are active, that are more active 7 days than, say, the rest of the country. So that actually bodes pretty well, because we know that physical activity is an important skill set to have for the rest of your life. So we definitely stack up very well to the rest of the sites. Now, here I'm going to show you a different type of graphs. So what I would try to do is I try to avoid any kind of numbers, because I think you kind of grasp a lot of the relationship much better with kind of pictures. So here we basically, what we're trying to show here is the relationship between watching videos and physical activity. So what we have, each of these stacked bars here is a different category for watching videos. So this is none, less than 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours, and more than 3 hours. So that's the different categories. And then what you see here in the different shades is the days of activity. And if there were a relationship, and the important bottom line here, there isn't. If there were a relationship between video playing and activity, what you should be seeing is that the stackings of the different colored bars here, of the different shades of the bars here, should be different across the different categories. And what you see here is they're absolutely, they're almost perfectly aligned. There's a little bit of difference, but really there isn't much. So what that means, at this age, at the age 9 to 10, watching videos is not associated with changes in physical activity. So the kids that play a lot of video games are just as active as the kids that don't play video games at all, which is important to know, because we know from other studies that that changes during adolescence, that video games and internet activity start to replace sports and physical activity. So one of the things obviously we're very interested in is, how do we keep this relationship? Because that actually is a fairly healthy relationship, right? You want to, there's nothing wrong with playing video games or with being on the internet, as long as you can do other things as well. And so this is actually quite encouraging. The same is true for, so here I showed you watching videos. The same is true for playing video games. So at this age, same kind of graph. It doesn't matter how much you're playing games, there really isn't a change in physical activity. So the kids at that age, at the ages 9 to 10, for some reason are still in balance in being able to play and also being active, which is very nice to see. And again, these are data from all of the sites. This is not just our site. So it really shows us that, you know, at this early stage, we still have them in balance. Now we looked at, and this gets a little more tedious, but again, the bottom line here is there isn't any dysregulation. One of the interesting things we were interested was, is this different for girls and for boys? So, you know, does playing video games, does that affect the physical activity for boys and girls differently? And at this age, again, ages 9 to 10, it does not. For the most part, the bars are equally distributed, and there really is no relationship between playing video games, being a boy or girl, and how active you are, which is actually, again, very encouraging, and it allows us now to look forward and seeing what happens as these kids age. So let me just kind of summarize for you where we are at this point. And we have plenty more information. What I try to do today is just give you a tiny little slice of the information that we already have gotten over the first 6 months from the ABCD study. What we have not done yet is we have not yet analyzed the brain images. We're still in the process of basically processing the data, because it's a lot more data processing for the brain images. We're hoping to be able to start to do this by the fall. That's why we focused initially on just the self-report scales and some of the behavior that we observed. But again, this will be forthcoming. So first of all, TV, video, internet, and gaming behavior is not different at the LIBR site here in Tulsa when compared to all other sites. We basically, our kids look just the same as all the other sites. TV, video, and internet, and gaming behavior is generally not associated with problem behavior in the ABCD participants. So what that means at this stage, we don't really see that watching more TV or watching more videos or playing more video games is associated with more problem behaviors. With one exception, only the participants who spend more than 4 hours per day watching TVs, watching videos, being on the internet, or playing video games show more problem behaviors. So if there is one take-home message, if you were to ask yourself, where should I make the cut, right, based on what we know, is less than 4 hours. So that's what we have learned so far. Now, again, these are associations. Whether that is causal, we can only tell by now following the kids over time. So one of the things we would want to see is, does it really, so the kids that did play less than 4 hours, if there are a certain subgroup of the kids that then start playing more than 4 hours, does that go together with an increase in problem behaviors? That would give us much more evidence that really there's a causal link. Right now, we really don't have that causal link. We have only these associations. But that's the first step. So I want to thank you for coming tonight. I want to remind you that if you know some other parents who would like to participate, we'd be happy to have them participate in this study. And really, we're open for recruitment. We're going to recruit until September of 2018. So basically, over the next 18 months, we still will be recruiting. So I want to, again, thank you, and really open it up now for questions, and any kind of questions you might have about the study, about things that you might be interested in. We had a first question just over there. So what we're trying to do is the target age is 9 to 10, but what we would do is if the child is, say, 8 or even 7, but ages in within the next 18 months, we could put the child on a wait list, and then once they age into the 9 to 10 range, we can then recruit them. Yeah, so this is actually the nice thing that what we're doing now. We're doing a number of associated studies. So we have some studies that are starting relatively soon where we actually will allow for a wider age range. So you should stay tuned. Come to our website. We have an ABCD website, and as soon as we're bringing up new studies where the kids will be a little older, we'll be happy to enroll the kids as well.
Is there a standalone question as to whether or not parents are limiting video game, TV, or video watching at all? Because the 4-hour group could very well be the kids that actually have no parental limits on how much they're doing it, which could affect a lot of things.
Yeah. We have a number of parental questions in the packet, and so I haven't looked at those yet. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that one of the things we want to also find out is what's the relationship between the parent-child relationship and then the video or the internet. I think that that's going to be a very important direction to go.
Is the study at all malleable over time? Because internet use is a difficult thing to pin down, especially when a kid is going to turn like 8 to 10. They're in one category of school, but
Yeah.
at 13 and so much goes on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the question was really: is the study malleable and it adapts itself to what really is going to be a moving target in a way? So a couple of sites have agreed to be what they call mobile technology sites. So for those sites, what is being planned is that we actually will give kids Fitbits and other electronic devices to then monitor them and see how active they are, see how much they engage in internet behavior, which will be a much more fine-grained assessment, right? Because the kids will be texting or whatever, Snapchatting. I don't even know what's the latest. But yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is absolutely a moving target.
This is a terrible question.
No, there are no terrible questions.
Okay, like you were talking about, like who's getting enrolled in this? Parents who are interested.
Well, yes,
What
yeah.
if we went to where the trouble kids are, and went backwards?
So it's actually, yes and no. I mean, absolutely, you're making a good point. So one of the things that we want to, I started talking about at the beginning, how we're trying to make this study representative of the Tulsa area, right? And obviously, when we recruit the kids, because they're 9 and 10, the parents have to give consent, right? So that is so it goes through the parents, no question. And obviously, it is there is a potential bias that the parents who are interested in what's happening with the kids' brains and all that, that they are more likely to enroll in the study. What we've tried to do is get the kids excited about the study. So Florence, we're going actually to different schools, and we are doing sort of teach them about the brain. You know, for example, we do little classes where we have them look at a sheep's brain and do these different fun experiments. The point here is, what we want to do is we want to get the kids excited about, oh, I want to participate in this study, and then hopefully have them bug their parents that, would it be okay if I participate? And that has happened to some extent. The idea is that we're hoping to also get the parents who may not be super interested in the beginning, but as the kids get more interested, maybe they get more interested.
You have each of those 4 hours chunked into different behavior, different activities. I'm assuming that have you looked at cumulative? I mean, if you've got kids watching TV for
Right.
2 hours,
Right.
and video games for 2 hours, and
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, no, you're asking the exact question we discussed this afternoon. So one of the things we want to do is create sort of cumulative risk indices. So at this stage, these are sort of separate times, right? So a kid could, for example, easily get into this 8 to 10 hour range by doing 2 hours of video gaming, 2 hours of TV watching, and 3 hours of video watching, something like that. And you're absolutely right. What we will do next is we'll be kind of combining these measures to see really what's the cumulative dose effect on the behavior. And is it, you know, one of the things that I've looked at it a little bit. The kids that are watching a lot of videos are also the kids that play a lot of video games. So, you know, there is an association that there is, you know, those kids kind of cluster in a particular group. But you're absolutely right. That's exactly one of the next steps, is to look at a higher risk. What makes for the most significant problem effect? So where are the associations the strongest? Any other questions? Yeah.
My grandpa has psoriasis. I was wondering if like diseases in that area ever affect anything.
That's a really good question. So in fact, actually, it's a super. So we just started to work with. So here's a kind of an interesting factoid. It turns out that there are more creatures living. Oh yeah. So what she was asking actually is her grandpa has psoriasis, right? And she was wondering whether conditions like that also affect maybe possibly the brain or other behaviors. So which is actually a really good question. So, and I was starting to say, thank you for reminding me to repeat the question. So what I started to say, so the matter of the fact is that we have more creatures living in and on us than we have cells in our body. So basically, we are a habitat for bacteria and viruses and other creatures. And that is called the microbiome. And in fact, we're studying now in a different project actually, to look at people with skin conditions, you know, like psoriasis. We found, because there's already some evidence that what that is associated with it that these creatures, these bugs that live in and on us, are changed by and may actually influence these skin conditions. And there is already some hint that we've looked particularly at dermatitis, which is a slightly different condition than psoriasis, but also a skin condition. That people with dermatitis may be at a higher risk for depression. So basically we're looking at that, and we have some initially very interesting findings. So it's a very, very good question.
So bearing in mind the concept of brain plasticity,
Mm-hmm.
and as we're becoming more digitally oriented, what would you hypothesize? Difficult question. What would you hypothesize our brain evolving
Yeah.
to deal with this enormous impact?
Yeah.
Digital.
So the question was, as we are consuming all these these internet, the videos, and so on, and because of our brain has enormous plasticity. Speaking to which, I'm going to come back to that question. I just one of our investigators just sent out a really interesting paper that came out in February of this year that looked at how the brain changes as a function of pregnancy. And found that there was profound changes in women in the brain before and after pregnancy, to the point that there were certain brain areas, and it'd be really fun to talk about in detail, but there clearly are fundamental changes of the brain of a woman before and after pregnancy, which is any woman that has had a child probably knew this already, but now we have actually proof for that. But the point is here, so one of the things, so then the speculation is with the brain plasticity as it is, how does this affect us? Now, one of the things that I've always been very interested in is if you expose yourself to what I, for the moment, will call the real world. So I'm coming back, I know that he knows exactly what I'm going to talk about. I'm a bicyclist, so I bike every weekend, and if you ever see me out in the boonies, that's probably me. I love to bike, and I actually love to bike much more than I love to sit on a stationary bike. And the reason is, when you bike out in the country, you have all kinds of smells and the air. I mean, there's just something about the whole experience that is incredible, right? I mean, you can feel pockets of cold and hot air. You can the moisture, the tension when there's when it's about to rain, all of that, right? I mean, it's incredibly intense, and of course the brain processes that information. But but the video gaming or the video watching or the TV watching, really we're primarily stimulating two senses, right? The visual sense and the auditory sense, and everything else is pretty much goes to sleep, if you think about it. So you are, to some degree, not really bringing other senses on board as much, right? We haven't come up with the smelly TV, and we haven't come up with the TV that out of a sudden puts cold air in your face or something like that. So you can see how that is potentially limiting. And I would venture to guess that if you were to compare a child or even an adult, because even as an adult we have very active plasticity, the areas that are important for processing visual information would be larger in kids that play more video games or watch more video. And the areas that are important for smell, that are important for three-dimensional spatial processing are probably reduced. So I do think that this has definitely influence on how our brain processes information. Absolutely.
My understanding is self-reported data.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you approach the sampling? Is it randomly or?
Yeah.
First question, geographically, how you cover this, and secondly, how you mitigate self-reporting bias?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the two questions were, how do we approach the sampling? Is it random sampling? And the second is, how do we deal with bias? And that's the first, the sampling So we work with, so one of the sites is a site in Michigan that's responsible for conducting large-scale representative surveys. And what they had done with us is they'd given us basically the schools from which we were supposed to recruit. So they basically gave us specific schools that we're supposed to be reaching out first to get a representative sample. And we've actually done reasonably well. Other sites have had a lot more problems. So we compare our distribution to what the census data look like, and we're actually very, very good. But it isn't like, because the study is really, as many of you know, quite involved. It's very difficult to just go from house to house and just randomly say, well, would you want to participate in this study? So we have to somehow get a buy-in from the family. I mean, that's the, so there is always going to be some degree of bias in that. Now, when it comes to reporting, one of the things that we do is it's very important that all of the information, the individual information, is kept confidential. We have like a certificate of confidentiality so that it can be discovered in the court of law. And we tell this to both the child and the parent. And we even tell the child, even at this age, that unless the child tells us something that is endangering him or herself, or that would be, where we would be aware of something severely unlawful, like child abuse or elder abuse or something like that to happen. Only in those extreme cases will we actually break confidentiality in order to encourage truthful responding. And then we have a couple of questionnaires that have some questions built in that allows us to calibrate some of the answers. But my guess is there will always be some degree of self-report bias, and part of what we're hoping is that by trying to take advantage of the large numbers that we have and looking at the relationships to some of these self-report biases, that we can at least correct a little bit for it. But there always will be some degree of bias because we're asking also some very, very personal questions.
When you mentioned Fitbit, it's objective information, it's metrics. If you made 10,000 steps, you did. So if you incorporate any kind of objective device or evidence, that would be just more legit.
Yeah, I completely agree. So one of the things that we're particularly interested in is what's called mobile health and mobile mental health. So we're actually hopefully starting a study where we actually do exactly that. I think, and I'm part of the mobile work group, and we're hoping eventually to bring a subgroup, a sub-study of the ABCD study to Tulsa. I completely agree. I think that the mental health assessment of the 21st century will not be the doctor asking you how you feel. Well, obviously they will still ask that. But really what it will be is it will be a much more dynamic assessment based on what you actually are doing. You know, where you're spending your time, what are you watching, who are you engaging with, how many people do you talk to, and all of that. I mean, we have to, I hate to say it, but all of that is currently being collected for commercial purposes. We should really be collecting it, well, we should really be analyzing it for health purposes. And so, yes, I could not agree more with you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Is it state funded? Is it private funded, state
Yeah,
funded?
so that's a really good, so this study is funded, among others, by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, but also from the National Institute of Mental Health and the National Institute of Child Development. So there's a whole consortium of, these are basically a nationally funded, NIH-funded study. So it's not privately funded.
So it's federal stuff.
It's federal dollars.
Besides one day, he wants to not fund it anymore.
Well, so that, no, I think that, so I think that there's a strong commitment really to this study even from the highest official. Because what happened was that obviously, you know, with every change in legislation, in the executive, there's some concern what will happen, how will research do, and we don't, as a whole, we don't know this. But as it relates to ABCD, there is a lot of, and we actually went last November, before the election, we went to Washington to present the study, and all the senators and all the representatives here from Oklahoma and from other states were extremely supportive. So I think there's a very strong sense of support that this is an important study, and we had very good conversations. So, how research looks overall is maybe a little more iffy, but I don't think that we're going to have some problems with ABCD. But that's a good question, yeah. Well, again, I want to thank you so much for coming tonight, and hopefully, if you find it interesting, we're going to do this. We're doing this every month, and we have different speakers, and we'll keep you updated on what's going on with ABCD in the future. Thank you.
Group, the one taking cause and effect, thinking psychopath and sociopath.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, because
Never bring it up.
no, I know. It's a tricky topic.